My husband left me after I lost my construction business to a hostile takeover he orchestrated. "You are a broke failure," he told me, as he threw my clothes onto the rainy sidewalk. At 34 years old, living out of my truck, I found myself sitting in a grimy clinic, selling my plasma for $100 just to buy gas and a sandwich. I thought I had hit rock bottom. But as the nurse checked my sample, she did not hand me the cash. She froze. Her eyes went wide with terror, and she hit a red panic button under the desk. "Ma'am, do not move," she whispered, backing away from me like I was a monster. Minutes later, the head doctor rushed in, sweat dripping down his forehead. He looked at me, not as a patient, but as if I were a ghost. I thought I was dying. I thought I had some terminal disease. But then he locked the door and said the words that would change the fate of the entire city. "Ma'am, your blood type does not exist in our database. In fact, it barely exists on Earth. A billionaire in Monaco will die in 24 hours without you, and his family is offering a blank check." Before I tell you how that single drop of blood turned my homeless nightmare into a billion-dollar empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And if you have ever had someone kick you when you were down, hit that like button and subscribe. You are going to want to see how I made them pay. My name is Jada, and 3 days ago I was the CEO of JV Builds, one of the most promising Black-owned construction firms in Atlanta. Today I am just a number in a plastic chair at the BioLife Plasma Center on the outskirts of town. The air inside smells like bleach and desperation. The fluorescent lights buzz with a headache-inducing hum, flickering over a room full of people who, like me, are trading their bodily fluids for a few hours of survival. My stomach growled a loud, embarrassing sound that made the man next to me shift in his seat. I had not eaten a real meal in 48 hours. My Ford F-150, the truck that used to haul lumber and high-end granite for luxury kitchens, was parked outside with the fuel light on. It was now my bedroom, my office, and my closet. Next, the nurse barked. Her name tag read Brenda. She was a heavy-set woman with tired eyes who looked at us donors with a mix of pity and disgust. I stood up, smoothing down my wrinkled work shirt, trying to maintain a shred of the dignity I used to wear like armor. I sat down at her station and extended my arm. My veins were prominent, strong, the veins of a woman who had poured concrete and framed houses with her own hands. "Address?" Brenda asked without looking up, her fingers hovering over a greasy keyboard. I hesitated. "I do not have a permanent address right now. Just put down the P.O. box on Martin Luther King Drive." Brenda stopped typing. She looked over her glasses, scanning my face, my messy hair, the dark circles under my eyes. "Homeless," she muttered, not as a question, but as a label. She typed it into the system with a loud, judgmental clack of the keys. "We cannot mail checks to a P.O. box, honey. If you want the new donor bonus, you need proof of residency. Today you just get the base rate. $50, $50. That would not even fill half my tank. It definitely would not help me get a hotel room to shower before my job interview tomorrow." But I nodded. "Fine, just take it." As she tied the rubber tourniquet around my arm, my phone buzzed in my lap. I glanced down and felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the needle. It was a FaceTime request from Tyson. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but a masochistic part of me needed to answer. I needed to see him. I needed to remind myself why I was fighting. I tapped the green button. Tyson's face filled the screen, smooth, handsome, and glowing with the kind of health that only money can buy. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I saw the skyline of Atlanta. My skyline. He was standing in the penthouse of the Sovereign building. The very penthouse I had put the deposit on 6 months ago. The penthouse we were supposed to share as husband and wife. Well, look who it is. Tyson smiled, showing off his veneered teeth. "You look rough, Jada. Living in the truck treating you well?" I grit my teeth, angling the phone so he would not see the plasma machine or the nurse prepping the needle. "What do you want, Tyson? Did you call to brag about how you forged my signature on the transfer deeds? Or how you sold my client list to your new father-in-law? Oh, stop living in the past, he laughed, taking a sip of amber liquid from a crystal glass. Business is business, baby. You were great at building houses, but you were terrible at playing the game. I just called to give you a friendly warning. Warning about what Tyson shifted the camera to show a white dress hanging on a mannequin in the background. It was elegant, expensive, and definitely not my size. Courtney and I are having our engagement party tonight at the lake house. The air left my lungs. The lake house. That was my masterpiece. I designed every inch of that glass-walled villa. I picked out the marble. I planted the cherry blossom trees in the courtyard. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. You are throwing a party in my house, I whispered, my voice trembling. Our house? Tyson corrected his voice, dropping to a cruel, patronizing tone. Well, technically the bank's house now since you defaulted. And since Courtney's daddy just bought the note from the bank, it is practically family property. Anyway, I know you still have the gate codes memorized. Do not come, Jada. We have armed security. I do not want you showing up looking like a beggar and ruining Courtney's big night. She is very sensitive to unpleasant smells. He laughed again. A rich, hearty laugh that made me want to reach through the screen and strangle him. Enjoy the party, Tyson, I said, my voice cold and hard. But remember one thing. I know where the bodies are buried in that house. I know where the pipes leak. I know where the foundation cracks. You might be living in it, but you will never own it. I hung up before he could respond. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I felt a hot tear slide down my cheek and angrily wiped it away. I would not cry for him, not here, not in front of Brenda. Speaking of Brenda, she was staring at me, listening to every word. Trouble in paradise. She asked, her voice dripping with fake sympathy as she jammed the needle into my arm a little too roughly. Just do your job, I snapped. She rolled her eyes and started the machine. I watched my blood, dark and rich, flow through the clear tubing. It was the only thing I had left to give. I closed my eyes, trying to meditate, trying to block out the image of Tyson drinking scotch in my living room. Suddenly, a piercing sound shattered the silence. Beep, beep, beep. It was not the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. It was a frantic, high-pitched alarm coming from my machine. The centrifuge, which was spinning my blood to separate the plasma, had stopped abruptly. Red lights on the console were flashing violently. What did you do? Brenda shrieked. She jumped back from her stool, knocking over a tray of vials. I did not touch it, I yelled, panic rising in my chest. What is happening? Is something wrong with me? Other donors were looking over, whispering. A security guard placed his hand on his holster and started walking toward us. Brenda looked at the digital display on the machine. Her face went pale. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a sheet of paper. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. Oh my God, she whispered. This has to be a glitch. This is impossible. Take it out, I shouted, trying to pull my arm back. The needle was still in my vein. Am I sick? Do I have HIV? Tell me, do not move. Brenda yelled, her voice cracking with fear. She grabbed a walkie-talkie from her belt. Code Black in Station 4. Get Dr. Eris down here now. Call the lab director. Do not let anyone leave the building. Code Black. The security guard drew his taser. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the tube coming out of my arm. My blood looked normal. It was red. It was liquid. But the way everyone was reacting, you would think I was pumping toxic waste. Within seconds, the double doors at the end of the hall burst open. A tall man in a white coat, Dr. Eris, sprinted toward us. He was followed by two other technicians. He looked frantic. He did not look at the machine. He looked directly at me. Is this the donor? He demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. Is this Jane Doe number 452? Her name is Jada, Brenda stammered. But doctor, look at the reading. The antigen markers. They are all null. Every single one. Dr. Eris shoved Brenda aside and stared at the monitor. He adjusted his glasses, squinting at the scrolling data. He tapped a few keys, ran a retest. The machine beeped again, confirming the result. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. He turned to me, his eyes wide, intense, and terrifyingly serious. "Miss Jada," he said, his voice low but firm, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not sick, you are not dying. But you cannot leave this facility." I ripped the tape off my arm, wincing as the needle slid out, blood dripping onto my jeans. "I am leaving right now. You people are crazy. I am calling the police." "Lock the doors," Dr. Aris shouted to the guard. "Nobody in or out." He grabbed my shoulders. His grip was strong. "Ms. Jada, stop. You do not understand. We just ran your sample against the global registry. Do you know what Rh null blood is?" I shook my head, my back pressed against the cold wall. "They call it golden blood," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. "Fewer than 50 people on this planet have it. It is the holy grail of hematology. And right now a notification just hit the international medical server." He pulled a tablet from his pocket and shoved it in my face. It was a news alert from Monaco. A famous billionaire patriarch had been in a catastrophic Formula One crash. He was bleeding out. "This man," Dr. Aris said, pointing to the screen, "has your blood type. He has been searching for a donor for 10 years. His private jet is already in the air. His representatives just contacted our headquarters. They are authorized to pay any price." I looked at the doctor then, down at the bloodstain on my cheap, dirty jeans. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I am saying, doctor," Aris whispered, leaning in close, "that the $50 you came here for is irrelevant. By the time the sun sets tonight, you will be the most valuable woman on earth. But we have a problem. The people coming for you, they do not just want a pint, they want the source. And they aren't the only ones watching the registry." Before I could process his words, the glass front doors of the clinic shattered. A black SUV had just rammed through the entrance. The black SUV did not crash into the clinic by accident. It was a calculated arrival. Before the dust from the shattered glass could even settle, 4 men in tailored tactical suits stepped out. They moved with a synchronized fluidity that screamed military training. The security guard reached for his taser, but he froze when he saw the red laser dot center on his chest. These were not police. They were private contractors, the kind that cost more per hour than this entire building was worth. Then the rear door opened. The man who stepped out did not look like a soldier. He looked like he owned the soldiers. He was an older European man, impeccably dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than my former house. He walked through the broken glass without looking down, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me. The air in the room shifted. The smell of bleach and sweat was suddenly overpowered by the scent of expensive cologne and ozone. He signaled for the doctor to step aside. Dr. Aris, who had been barking orders just seconds ago, shrank back against the wall, clutching his clipboard like a shield. The man stopped 2 feet in front of me. He did not look at my dirty clothes or my messy hair. He looked at me with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. "Ms. Jada," he said, his voice thick with a French accent, "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. We do not have the luxury of time. My name is Valmont. I represent the Dubois family of Monaco." I pressed my back against the plastic chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound tough. "Am I in trouble?" Valmont pulled a silver case from his pocket. "On the contrary, you are the solution. Dr. Aris is correct. Your blood is Rh null. It is the golden blood. My employer, Monsieur Alexandre Dubois, was in a catastrophic accident on the track in Monte Carlo this morning. He has lost a significant amount of blood. His body rejects all common transfusions. There are only 43 people on record with your blood type. 3 are in Japan, 2 are in Brazil. But you, Ms. Jada, you are the only one within a 6-hour flight radius." He opened the silver case. Inside sat a checkbook and a fountain pen. He tore a check out and placed it on the small blood-stained table next to the centrifuge. I looked down. It was a cashier's check drawn on a Swiss bank. The signature line was signed, the amount line was blank. Monsieur Dubois is a man of infinite resources, Valmont said softly. But right now his life is finite. We need a direct transfusion. We have a jet waiting at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. In exchange for 1 pint of your blood, you may write any number you wish on this piece of paper. 1 million, 10 million, 50 million. It does not matter to us. We simply need you to say yes. I stared at the check. My hands were shaking. 10 minutes ago, I was worried about having enough gas to keep the heater running in my truck tonight. Now a piece of paper sat in front of me that could buy me a private island. I could disappear. I could go to Paris or Tokyo. I could never worry about hunger or cold again. I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt cold and heavy in my hand. I brought the tip to the paper. But then my phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another notification. It was a text from Tyson. A picture. It was him and Courtney standing on the balcony of the lake house clinking champagne glasses. The caption read, "Toasting to new beginnings and flushing out the trash." I froze. The ink from the pen hovered millimeters above the paper. If I took this money, I would be rich. But Tyson would still be living in my house. Courtney's father, Mr. Sterling, the man who used his political connections to freeze my business accounts and blacklist my company, would still be the king of Atlanta real estate. They would still be winning. I would just be a rich fugitive running away from my failure. Money could buy me comfort, but it could not buy me justice. Money runs out, but power is eternal. I closed my eyes and I saw it. I saw the smirk on Mr. Sterling's face when he told me that a woman like me did not have the temperament for large-scale construction. I saw Tyson forging my signature on the transfer deeds. I saw the bank teller cutting up my credit cards. They didn't just want me broke. They wanted me erased. I opened my eyes. The fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at Valmont. "No," I said. Valmont's eyebrows raised slightly. "Ms. Jada, perhaps you do not understand. There is no limit. You can write $100 million if you wish." "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steady and low. "But I do not want your money. I want your leverage." I picked up the check, crumpled it into a ball, and dropped it onto the dirty floor. Valmont watched it fall, his expression unreadable. "I am an architect, Mr. Valmont. I know how to build things, but I also know how to demolish them. The man I used to be married to, Tyson, and his new father-in-law, Franklin Sterling, they destroyed my life. They used legal loopholes and debt leveraging to steal my company and my properties." I stood up, wiping the blood from my arm. "You said your employer has infinite resources. I want you to use those resources. I don't want cash. I want you to buy their debt." Valmont tilted his head, intrigued. "Clarify." I stepped closer to him. "The Sterling Group is over-leveraged. They borrowed heavily to acquire my assets. I know their loans are bundled and held by a chaotic mix of creditors. And Tyson, he has gambling debts he thinks nobody knows about. I want the Dubois family to purchase every single cent of debt attached to their names. I want to be the one holding the leash. That is my price. 1 pint of blood for total financial ownership of my enemies." Valmont stared at me for a long moment. The silence in the room was deafening. The nurses and security guards were holding their breath. Then a slow, small smile spread across Valmont's face. It was not a smile of kindness. It was a smile of recognition. He saw the predator in me waking up. "Most people would have taken the money and bought a yacht," Valmont said quietly. "You are a rare breed, Ms. Jada." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a satellite phone. He dialed a number and waited. When he spoke, he switched to rapid French, but I understood the tone. It was urgent. It was commanding. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end, then looked at me with eyes that gleamed with dangerous amusement. He spoke into the phone again, switching to English so I could hear him clearly. "Monsieur Dubois, prepare the legal team. She does not want the payout. She wants the Sterling portfolio. Yes, all of it." He hung up the phone and extended his hand to me. "We have a deal. The jet is waiting." By the time we land in Monaco, you will own the banknotes on every brick of the sterling empire. Shall we go, Madam Chairman? I looked down at my dirty jeans and worn-out sneakers. Then I looked at the door. I was walking out of that clinic a different woman than the one who walked in. Tyson thought he had thrown me away like garbage. He had no idea that he had just forced me to become a monster. "Let's go," I said, "and get me a lawyer. I have an engagement party to crash." The silence of the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton was heavier than the noise of the plasma clinic. I woke up not in the cramped back seat of my Ford truck, but in a bed large enough to sleep a family of 4 wrapped in sheets that felt like spun silk. For a moment I panicked, reaching for my keys, my instincts still wired for survival on the streets. Then I saw the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Atlanta skyline, the city lights shimmering like spilled diamonds. The same city that had chewed me up and spit me out was now lying at my feet. A knock at the door broke my trance. Before I could answer, a team of people flowed into the room like a well-rehearsed orchestra. There was a doctor who checked my vitals and gave me a vitamin IV to replenish what the stress had depleted. There was a chef who placed a tray of grilled salmon and nutrient-rich greens on the table. And standing by the window looking like a statue carved from granite was Valmont. He did not ask how I slept. He simply pointed to a black leather portfolio sitting on the coffee table. "Eat," Valmont said, his voice calm and commanding, then read, "You need to know exactly who you are fighting before you step into that ring." I forced myself to eat, feeling the strength return to my limbs with every bite. When I finished, I opened the portfolio. The first page made my blood run cold. It was a copy of a contract between Tyson and Franklin Sterling, the father of the woman who stole my husband. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes widening as I realized the magnitude of the betrayal. Tyson had not just taken my company's money, he had stolen my mind. Attached to the contract were blueprints, my blueprints. The intricate complex designs for the Glass Lake house, the very venue where their engagement party was happening tonight. I had spent 3 years perfecting those angles, calculating the load-bearing capacity of the cantilevered deck, and designing the hidden ventilation system that kept the glass from fogging. But on the bottom right corner, where my stamp should have been, was a fresh seal, designed by Tyson Brooks' lead architect. I looked up at Valmont, my hands shaking not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. "He told them he designed it," I whispered. Valmont nodded. "That is how he seduced the Sterling family. Franklin Sterling is a real estate mogul, but he lacks vision. He thought he was acquiring a genius architect's son-in-law. He has no idea that Tyson cannot even draw a straight line without a ruler. Tyson sold your intellectual property to buy his seat at their table." I flipped the page. There were bank transfers. Tyson had been siphoning funds from our construction accounts into offshore gambling sites for 2 years. He had bankrupted my company on purpose to cover his losses, then blamed my incompetence to the bankruptcy court. He had framed me. I closed the folder. The tears I expected to cry did not come. The sadness was gone, burned away by the truth. I was not a victim of bad luck. I was a victim of a crime. And the statute of limitations had not run out. A new group of people entered the suite. This time they wheeled in racks of clothing. A stylist with eager eyes stepped forward, holding up a sparkling emerald green evening gown. "For the party, Ms. Jada," she chirped. "We thought something glamorous, something that says you are here to celebrate." I looked at the dress. It was beautiful. It was soft. It was the kind of dress a guest would wear. "No," I said, standing up. The stylist paused. "But the color matches your skin tone perfectly." I walked over to the rack. I pushed aside the tulle, the sequins, and the silk chiffon. I was not going there to celebrate. I was not going there to be a guest. I was going there to conduct a hostile takeover. "I need a suit," I said. I dug through the hangers until I found it. A white tuxedo suit, razor-sharp lapels, high-waisted trousers that elongated my legs. It was structured, architectural, and imposing. White is usually the color of surrender, But tonight, it would be the color of a ghost coming back to haunt the living. When I stepped out of the dressing room, the room went quiet. The suit fit like a second skin. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek bun. My makeup was minimal, highlighting the sharp angles of my face. I did not look like the woman who slept in a truck. I looked like the woman who owned the road. Valmont stepped forward. He did not smile, but his eyes gleamed with approval. He held out the black leather portfolio. "Your weapon, madam," he said. I took the files. I did not need a purse. I did not need a clutch. I carried the evidence of their fraud in my hand like a royal decree. We took the private elevator down to the garage. Waiting for us was not a taxi, not an Uber, but a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom. The driver opened the door and I slid into the leather interior that smelled of power and old money. As the car pulled out onto Peachtree Street, I watched the city blur past. I thought about Tyson's laugh when he told me I was worthless. I thought about Courtney's smirk when she took the keys to my house. They thought they had buried me. They forgot that I was a seed. Valmont sat opposite me, checking his watch. "We will arrive in 20 minutes. The security at the gate has been instructed to let this car pass. The Sterling family assumes it is a VIP guest. By the time they realize who is inside, it will be too late." I looked down at the blueprints in my lap. I ran my finger over the lines of the house I built. I knew every secret of that building. I knew where the master breaker was. I knew which floorboards creaked. And most importantly, I knew about the safe hidden behind the library wall, a safe that Tyson surely did not know existed because he never read the original schematics. "I am ready," I said, my voice steady. The Rolls-Royce turned onto the winding road that led to the lake. Up ahead I could see the glow of the party. Dozens of luxury cars were parked along the driveway. Music drifted through the trees. It looked like a fairy tale. But the clock had struck midnight, and Cinderella did not lose her shoe this time. She brought a sledgehammer. "Driver," I said, leaning forward, "do not drop me at the entrance. Drive right up to the front steps." The car accelerated smoothly. We bypassed the valet, ignoring the waving attendants. We rolled past the fountains and the manicured hedges. The car came to a stop directly at the base of the grand staircase, blocking the path of the waiters carrying champagne trays. The heavy door of the Rolls-Royce swung open. I stepped out. The flash of a photographer's camera blinded me for a second. Then I adjusted my vision. At the top of the stairs, standing under the massive chandelier of the open foyer, were Tyson and Courtney. They were holding hands, laughing at something a guest had said. Then they looked down. The laughter died in their throats. Tyson dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the stone steps, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I adjusted my white jacket, gripped the black folder tighter, and began to climb the stairs. One step at a time. The sound of my heels clicking on the stone was the only sound in the world. "Hello, husband," I said, my voice carrying through the silent night air. "I believe you have something of mine." The glass lake house glowed against the night sky like a lantern floating on dark water. Seeing it from the bottom of the driveway was like looking at a piece of my soul that had been ripped out of my chest and sold to the highest bidder. I remembered sketching the initial concept on a napkin 3 years ago. I remembered arguing with the structural engineers about the cantilevered deck that hung over the lake, defying gravity. I remembered picking out every single pane of floor-to-ceiling glass to ensure the sunset hit the living room at the perfect angle. And now, through those very windows, I could see hundreds of people drinking champagne and celebrating the thieves who stole it from me. The party was a suffocating mix of Atlanta's old money white elite and the new money black social climbers who were desperate to be accepted by them. Luxury cars lined the driveway, a parade of Bentleys and Aston Martins that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. I could hear the clinking of crystal and the low hum of jazz floating down the hill. It was a scene of perfect, curated wealth, and I was about to burn it to the ground. I tightened my grip on the black leather portfolio. The white tuxedo suit felt like armor. Valmont walked a step behind me, his presence a silent, terrifying shadow. As we approached the massive front entrance, two private security guards in tactical vests stepped forward to block our path. They were big men hired to keep out the riffraff, and to them, an uninvited woman walking up the driveway was a threat. "Ma'am, this is a private event," the taller guard said, placing a heavy hand on his holster. "I need to see your invitation, or you need to turn around and leave the premises immediately." I did not stop walking. I did not even look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the front door where Tyson was holding court. I said, "Stop," the guard barked, stepping directly in front of me. Before he could reach out to grab my arm, Valmont moved. It was not a violent motion, but it was so precise and commanding that the air seemed to freeze. He held up a single card, black with gold embossing. It was not an invitation. It was a security clearance level that these guards had likely never seen before, issued by the firm that owned their contracting company. "Touch her," Valmont said, his voice low and smooth like a razor blade wrapped in silk, "and you will not only lose your job tonight, but you will never work in private security in this state again. Step aside." The guard looked at the card, then at Valmont's bespoke suit, and finally at the Rolls-Royce Phantom idling behind us. The color drained from his face. He realized instantly that he was punching below his weight class. He stepped back, bowing his head slightly, and swept his arm toward the door. "My apologies, ma'am. Please go right ahead." I walked past him, my heels clicking rhythmically on the slate walkway. I ascended the floating concrete steps that led to the main foyer. The double doors were open, spilling golden light onto the porch. Inside, the party was in full swing. Tyson stood in the center of the room, looking every bit the successful architect he pretended to be. He was wearing a velvet dinner jacket, holding a glass of scotch and laughing at something his new brother-in-law Hunter was saying. Hunter, the ruthless lawyer who had buried me in paperwork, was clapping Tyson on the back, beaming with pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hunter announced, his voice booming over the music, "let us raise a glass to the man of the hour. Not only has he captured my sister's heart, but look at this house, a true visionary. Tyson designed this masterpiece from the ground up. He is the future of architecture in this city." Applause broke out. I watched Tyson soak it up. He nodded humbly, raising his glass to the room. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. It was a labor of love. Every line, every angle, I did it for Courtney. That was the moment I stepped across the threshold. The sound of my heels on the imported Italian stone was sharp and distinct, cutting through the applause. I stood framed in the doorway, the white suit glowing under the chandelier light. One by one, heads turned. The applause faltered. The chatter died down. It started as a ripple of confusion near the door and spread outward until the entire room fell into a stunned silence. The jazz band in the corner trailed off, the saxophone player lowering his instrument as he sensed the tension in the room. Tyson's smile froze. He looked at me, blinking rapidly, as if he were trying to hallucinate me away. His eyes darted from my face to the white suit, trying to reconcile the homeless woman he saw on FaceTime an hour ago with the imposing figure standing in his foyer. Courtney was the first to react. She was standing next to Tyson, wearing a shimmering silver gown that clung to her body. She looked perfect, expensive, and completely hollow. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized me. There was no fear in her face, only annoyance. To her, I was just a pest that had returned after being exterminated. She whispered something to Tyson, then stepped forward, a fake, pitying smile plastered on her face. She held a full glass of red wine in her hand. "Well, look who decided to crash the party," Courtney said, her voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "Is that Jada?" "Oh, honey, this is embarrassing. Did you come to ask for your old job back?" "We are actually fully staffed for the evening." A few guests chuckled nervously. They were the sycophants, the ones who would laugh at anything the hostess said. I walked further into the room. The crowd parted for me, creating a wide aisle between me and the happy couple. I did not say a word. I just kept my eyes locked on Tyson. Courtney did not like being ignored. She stepped into my path, blocking my view of her fiancé. I am talking to you, she snapped, losing the facade of politeness. You are not welcome here. This is a celebration for family and friends. You are neither. You are trespassing. I stopped less than 2 feet from her. I could smell the expensive champagne on her breath and the insecurity radiating off her in waves. I am not here for the party, Courtney, I said calmly. I am here to correct a mistake. Courtney laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. The only mistake was inviting you into our lives in the first place. You are pathetic. Look at you wearing a white suit to a wedding event. Who do you think you are? The bride. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes gleaming with malice. Then, with a theatrical gasp, she tilted her hand. It was not an accident. It was a calculated move executed with the precision of a mean girl who had spent her entire life bullying people she considered beneath her. The entire contents of her wineglass splashed onto the front of my white jacket. The dark crimson liquid soaked into the pristine fabric, instantly spreading like a fresh gunshot wound across my chest. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath echoed off the glass walls. Someone in the back murmured, "Oh my God!" Courtney covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with mock surprise. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. My hand slipped. "I am so sorry. But honestly, it is probably for the best. That suit looked like a cheap rental anyway. Now you have a reason to leave." Tyson smirked. He finally found his courage seeing me humiliated. He took a step forward, ready to call security, ready to throw me out again. But I did not move. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not even look down at the stain. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief. I slowly, deliberately dabbed at the wine that had splashed onto my lapel. Then I looked past the stain, past the suit, and down at the floor. A small puddle of red wine was pooling on the white stone tiles near my feet. "You should be careful, Courtney," I said, my voice steady and amplified by the acoustic perfection of the room I had designed. I pointed a manicured finger at the floor. "That isn't ceramic tile. That is Bianco Carrara marble imported directly from the quarries in Tuscany. It is extremely porous. If you do not clean that red wine up in the next 30 seconds, it will leave a permanent stain that no amount of money can remove." I looked up, locking eyes with her. "But of course you would not know that. Because you are just a guest in this house. You do not know the maintenance requirements of the materials. Only the owner knows that. And Courtney, looking at the deed in this portfolio, your name is nowhere to be found." I dropped the wine-soaked handkerchief onto the floor, right into the puddle. "Now somebody get a mop. We have business to discuss. Get out of my house, Jada." Tyson lunged toward me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His velvet jacket bunched up around his shoulders as he tried to physically intimidate me, forgetting that the woman standing before him had spent 10 years navigating construction sites dominated by men twice his size. He was shouting for security, his voice cracking with a desperation that everyone in the room could hear. He knew that if I stayed even 1 minute longer, the carefully constructed facade of his genius would crumble into dust. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply held my ground, watching him unravel. The 2 security guards who had let me in stood by the door, their arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. They worked for the firm Valmont owned now. Tyson could scream until his throat bled, but nobody was coming to save him. "You seem upset, Tyson," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "Are you afraid I'm going to ruin the party? Or are you afraid I'm going to tell them the truth about the foundation of this house?" "I am not afraid of a bitter, bankrupt ex-wife," Tyson spat, though his eyes darted nervously to the crowd of onlookers. "You are jealous. You are mentally unstable. You are making a scene because you cannot handle that. I succeeded where you failed." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "You are right about one thing, Tyson. I am making a scene. But I think your guests deserve a little entertainment to go with their dinner. Something more authentic than your speech." I pulled my phone from the pocket of my white suit. This house was my design. I wired the smart home system myself. I knew the IP addresses of every device on the network. I knew the admin passwords because I was the one who set them up 3 years ago, long before Tyson even knew how to turn on the breaker panel. With a single tap of my thumb, I bypassed the firewall and hijacked the main media server. Behind Tyson, the massive 80-inch screen that had been displaying a slideshow of his engagement photos flickered. The image of Tyson and Courtney kissing on a yacht vanished. The screen went black for a second, and then a grainy, time-stamped video feed appeared. The room went silent. The jazz band had stopped playing. All eyes were glued to the screen. It was footage from inside my old home office. The date stamp in the corner read 2 years ago. On the screen, Tyson was sitting at my drafting table. He looked frustrated. He was slamming his fist onto the desk. He was holding a stylus pen trying to trace over a digital blueprint on my tablet. On the video, Tyson's voice came through the speakers loud and clear. "How do you do this stupid curve?" he muttered to himself, throwing the pen across the room. "I cannot replicate her signature. It is too complex." The video cut to another clip. Tyson was on the phone, pacing back and forth. "No, I cannot send you the raw files yet," he was whispering into the phone. "The file is encrypted. Jada has the password. I have to wait until she falls asleep to steal her laptop again. Just tell Sterling I am working on the final touches. He does not know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a picket fence anyway." The crowd gasped. A ripple of shock went through the room. I saw Mr. Sterling Courtney's father clutch his chest, his face turning a deep shade of purple. He looked from the screen to his future son-in-law with a mixture of confusion and horror. Tyson turned around and saw the video. His knees buckled. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He scrambled toward the remote control on the coffee table, frantically mashing buttons, trying to turn it off. "Stop it! Turn it off!" "It is a lie," he screamed, but the video kept playing. It showed him practicing my signature over and over again on a piece of tracing paper, tongue sticking out in concentration like a child trying to forge a permission slip. I stepped closer to him, addressing the crowd. "You all praised him for the cantilevered deck," I said, pointing at the screen. "You gave him awards for the glass curvature. But as you can see, the only thing Tyson ever designed was a scheme to steal my life's work. He did not draw a single line of this house. He traced it. He is not an architect. He is a tracer." Murmurs of disgust broke out. People were pulling out their phones, recording the meltdown. The golden boy of Atlanta architecture was being exposed as a fraud in real time. Tyson looked around, his eyes wide and wet with tears. He looked at Courtney, begging for support, but she had stepped away from him, looking at him like he was something she had stepped in. "It is fake," Tyson yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She used AI. It is a deepfake. She is trying to frame me because I left her." Suddenly a slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the back of the room. It was not applause, it was mocking. Hunter, the family lawyer and Tyson's best man, walked into the center of the circle. He was smiling. It was the smug, condescending smile of a man who knows he holds all the cards. He did not look at the screen. He looked directly at me. "Bravo, Jada," Hunter said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Truly a cinematic masterpiece. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. I assume you edited that little video in your car while you were sleeping in the parking lot." He stopped beside Tyson, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Tyson instantly straightened up, emboldened by the presence of his legal shark. "You can fool these good people with your little tech tricks," Jada Hunter continued, addressing the crowd. "But you cannot fool the law. And the law is built on paper, not on pixelated videos that anyone can fabricate on a laptop." Hunter reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. It was thick, bound in blue legal paper and stamped with the official seal of the state court. "You claim Tyson stole your designs?" Hunter said, holding the document up for everyone to see. "You claim this house is your intellectual property. But that is very interesting considering you signed this." He walked over to me and shoved the document in my face. "This is the bankruptcy settlement you filed 6 months ago, Jada. Do you recognize it?" Specifically, Section 4, Paragraph B. I stared at the paper. I knew exactly what it was. It was the document I had signed when the bank was threatening to seize my truck. I had been desperate, exhausted, and broken. Hunter turned to the crowd, reading aloud. The debtor, Jada Vance, hereby assigns transfers and conveys all intellectual property, including but not limited to architectural drawings, blueprints, digital files, and future concepts to the primary creditor, the Sterling Group, in exchange for debt forgiveness. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. You sold it, Jada. You sold every idea in your head to pay off your credit card bills. You signed the rights to this house over to Tyson and the Sterling family. Legally, Tyson could draw a stick figure and call it his, and it would not matter because he owns the copyright. You are not a victim here. You are a seller who has seller's remorse. The room shifted again. The guests who had been disgusted by Tyson just seconds ago now looked at me with suspicion. To them, the law was God. If I had signed a contract, then I was in the wrong. It did not matter if I was coerced. It did not matter if Tyson was incompetent. The paper said he owned it. Hunter laughed, tossing the document onto the table next to the spilled wine. So you can play your little videos, Jada. You can cry about fairness. But in the eyes of the court, you are nothing but a trespasser slandering the rightful owner of this property. You have no claim here. This house belongs to Tyson. The designs belong to Tyson. And you belong on the street. Tyson puffed out his chest. See, I told you she was crazy. She is just trying to extort money from us. I stood there surrounded by hostile faces. The video on the screen had looped back to the beginning, but nobody was watching it anymore. They were watching me, waiting for me to break. They thought Hunter had checkmated me. They thought the piece of paper was the ultimate weapon. I looked at the document. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It looked like mine. It was a masterful forgery, or maybe I had signed it in a haze of stress and exhaustion. It did not matter. Hunter had built a fortress of lies using the legal system as his bricks. The silence that followed Hunter's declaration was heavier than the marble slabs beneath my feet. It was the kind of silence that suffocates truth. The guests who had been whispering about Tyson's incompetence just moments ago now looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. To them, the blue legal document sitting on the table was more real than the blood and sweat I had poured into this foundation. In their world, paper beat passion every single time. Hunter knew this. He stood there adjusting his silk tie, looking down at me like I was an unruly child who had interrupted a serious conversation among adults. You should leave now, Jada Hunter said, his voice smooth and dripping with false concern. He pitched his voice so the entire room could hear him, turning his cruelty into a performance. We all understand that you are going through a difficult time. Bankruptcy, divorce, homelessness. It is enough to make anyone snap. But coming here, harassing a successful family, making up stories about ghostwriters and stolen designs. This is not a legal strategy. This is a mental health crisis. He tapped his temple, signaling to the crowd that I was unstable. The guests nodded in agreement. I heard a woman in pearls whisper to her husband that it was sad how far I had fallen. They were rewriting my history in real time. I was no longer the wronged CEO. I was the crazy ex-wife who could not let go. I looked at Tyson. He was hiding behind Hunter's shoulder, his chest heaving with relief. He looked like a man who had just been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. He puffed himself up, feeding off Hunter's confidence. Yeah, Jada Tyson said, his voice gaining strength. You need help. Seriously, stalking us like this, hacking my engagement photos. It is pathetic. Just go back to your truck and leave us alone. The mention of the truck was a low blow, designed to remind everyone of my poverty compared to their wealth. Courtney laughed a sharp, cruel sound. Do not worry about the truck, she said. I am sure security can call a tow truck to remove that eyesore from our driveway. Franklin Sterling, the patriarch, finally decided he had seen enough. He stepped out from the crowd, his face red with anger. He was a man used to giving orders and having them obeyed instantly. He did not look at me. He looked at the two security guards standing by the door. "Get her out of here," Sterling barked. "I do not care who she came with. She is trespassing on private property and harassing my guests. If she resists, call the police and have her arrested for disorderly conduct. I want her gone. Now." The guards hesitated. They looked at Valmont, who was still standing silently in the shadows, watching the scene with the intensity of a hawk. But Sterling was the man signing their paychecks tonight. They took a step toward me, their hands reaching for the handcuffs on their belts. The walls were closing in. Legally, Hunter had trapped me. Socially, they had ostracized me. Physically, they were about to remove me. I had seconds to act. I knew I could not win a legal argument right now. Courts took months. I needed to win this room in seconds. I realized then that I had been fighting the wrong battle. I was trying to prove I owned the house on paper. But ownership is not just about deeds and titles. Ownership is about understanding. A mother knows her child's cry in a crowded room. An artist knows the brushstroke that hides a mistake. And an architect knows the secrets that do not appear on the floor plan. I raised my hand, palm out, stopping the guards in their tracks. My eyes did not leave Tyson. "Wait," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was commanded. It stopped the guards. It stopped Sterling. I turned to Hunter. "You are a very good lawyer, Hunter. You have a piece of paper that says Tyson owns my ideas. You have a document that says he is the architect of record." I took a slow step toward Tyson. He flinched, stepping back until he bumped into the table. "But paper is flammable, Tyson. Knowledge is fireproof. You can forge a signature. You can steal a file. You can put your name on a plaque. But you cannot fake the instinct of a creator." I looked around the room, making eye contact with the wealthy investors and real estate developers who were judging me. "You all invest in buildings," I said. "You know that a building is more than just walls and a roof. It is a living system. It has a pulse. It has veins. If Tyson designed this house, if he truly built it from the ground up as he claims, then he should know its anatomy better than anyone." I turned back to Tyson. He was sweating now. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by the look of a student who had not studied for the final exam. "Let's test your ownership, Tyson," I said. "Mr. Sterling," I called out. "You paid for this house. You trust this man. Let him prove he knows what he built." Sterling frowned, crossing his arms. "He is not on trial here." "Oh, but he is," I interrupted. "Because if he did not design this house, then he does not know about the structural flaw in the cantilevered deck that could send all your guests tumbling into the lake if the wind hits 40 miles per hour. Gasps erupted from the balcony. People instinctively stepped back inside, away from the glass doors. "That is a lie," Tyson screamed. "There is no flaw. The engineering is perfect." "Is it?" I asked. "Then tell me, Tyson, what is the tensile strength of the steel beams supporting the master suite?" Tyson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Hunter. Hunter looked away. He could not object to a math question. 50,000 psi. Tyson guessed, his voice shaking. "Wrong," I said. "It is 70,000. But that is an easy one. You could have read that on a spec sheet. Let's try something only the true architect would know." I walked over to the massive stone kitchen island. I ran my hand along the cool surface. "This house is built on a slope," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that forced everyone to lean in. To balance the load, I had to create a negative space, a void in the center of the structure to distribute the weight of the roof. I locked eyes with Tyson. He was pale, his breathing shallow. He knew I was cornering him, but he did not know where the trap was. "We call it a ghost room, Tyson. It is a sealed chamber hidden behind a false wall. It is not on the blueprints you stole because I never drew it. I built it myself with my own hands on the weekends when you were out gambling. It contains the main server for the house, the backup generator controls, and the original hand-drawn sketches of this entire project signed and dated by me 3 years ago." The room was deadly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. "If this is your house, Tyson," I said, my voice hard as granite, If you are the genius architect who built this masterpiece for your bride, tell us where it is." Tyson looked around the room frantically. He looked at the walls. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the floor. He looked like a rat trapped in a maze. I, he stammered. It is in the basement. Behind the wine cellar." I laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "There is no basement, Tyson. We are on a granite bedrock. You cannot dig a basement here." I slammed my hand down on the stone table. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. "Tell them," I shouted. "Tell your wife where the ghost room is." Tyson crumbled. He looked at Courtney, tears streaming down his face. "I do not know," he wailed. "I do not know." She never told me. The confession hung in the air. He had not just admitted he did not know where the room was. He had admitted that I never told him. He had admitted that the knowledge was mine to give. Hunter closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew the case was lost. Sterling looked at Tyson with pure disgust. Courtney took a step away from her fiancé, looking at him like he was a stranger. I straightened my jacket, brushing off an imaginary speck of dust. "You do not know because you are a thief, Tyson. You are a tenant in my mind. And now I am serving you an eviction notice." I turned to the fireplace. "The ghost room is not in the basement. It is right here, in the heart of the home." I reached out and pressed the third stone from the left on the mantel. A hidden hydraulic mechanism hissed. The guests screamed as a section of the solid stone wall swung open, revealing a dark, hidden corridor that no one knew existed. The grinding sound of stone sliding against stone filled the silent room. It was a heavy industrial sound, the sound of a secret being forcibly dragged into the light. The guests gasped and stepped back as the massive granite slab to the right of the fireplace slowly receded into the wall, revealing a narrow steel door that had been perfectly camouflaged for 3 years. I looked at Tyson. His face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He was staring at the opening, like it was the mouth of a monster waiting to swallow him whole. Beside him, Hunter stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his legal arguments dying in his throat. There is no precedent for a hidden room in a contract dispute. I stepped toward the opening. The air that drifted out was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and dry concrete. It was the smell of the house's nervous system. I punched a 6-digit code into the keypad on the steel door. It beeped cheerfully, a sound only I knew, and the door clicked open. I did not go inside. I did not need to. I reached in and pulled a lever on the wall. Bright LED strip lights flickered on, illuminating the cramped space for everyone to see. It was not a panic room. It was a server room. Banks of blinking green lights covered one wall. Thick bundles of color-coded cables ran along the ceiling like arteries, and in the center, bolted to the floor, was a heavy-duty, fireproof safe. "This is the brain of the Glass Lake House," I said, my voice echoing slightly. "This system controls the geothermal heating, the solar array, and the security grid. Tyson, if you designed this house, please tell the guests what operating system the main server runs on." Tyson said nothing. He could not even speak. He was shaking his head, backing away until he hit the edge of the sofa. I walked into the small room and placed my hand on the safe. I spun the dial. Left to 15. Right to 24. Left to 34. The numbers were the date I incorporated my company. The tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying snap. I swung the heavy door open. Inside there was no gold, no jewelry, no cash. There was just a single worn leather tube and a black external hard drive. I took the leather tube first. I walked back out into the living room and tossed it onto the coffee table right on top of the fake legal documents Hunter had brought. "Open it, Mr. Sterling," I said to Courtney's father. "You have been in real estate for 40 years. You know what real blueprints look like." Franklin Sterling hesitated, then reached out with trembling hands. He uncapped the tube and slid out the rolled sheets of paper. They were not pristine computer-printed schematics. They were old. The edges were frayed. There were coffee stains on the corners. He unrolled them. They were hand-drawn pencil sketches layered with vellum overlays. There were notes scribbled in the margins in my handwriting, calculations about wind load, reminders to call the steel supplier, corrections where I had erased a wall and moved it 2 inches. "Look at the dates, Mr. Sterling," I commanded. He squinted at the bottom corner. "These are dated 3 years ago," he whispered. "That is right," I said. 3 years ago. Long before I met Tyson. Long before your daughter decided she wanted my life. Those are the original sketches. They have my fingerprints, my sweat, and my DNA all over them. You can fake a digital file. You can Photoshop a signature, but you cannot fake the age of paper and graphite. I turned to the crowd. Tyson claimed he designed this house on a computer, but real architecture starts with a pencil and a dream. He stole the digital files, but he never knew these existed, because I kept them locked away in the heart of the house he never understood. Courtney looked at the blueprints, then at Tyson. Her expression was one of pure revulsion. She was realizing that the genius she thought she was marrying was nothing more than a con artist in a velvet jacket. "But I am not done," I said. I held up the black hard drive I had taken from the safe. "Proving I built the house is one thing, but proving why I lost my company is another." Tyson's eyes locked onto the drive. He knew what it was. He made a strangled noise in his throat, a sound of pure animal panic. When Tyson took over my company, I explained, addressing the room. He scrubbed the main office servers. He deleted emails, erased transaction logs, and shredded bank statements. He thought he had destroyed the evidence of his embezzlement. He thought he had wiped the slate clean so he could blame the bankruptcy on my mismanagement. I took a step closer to the 80-inch screen where the video of Tyson was still paused. But he forgot that the Glass Lake House server was set up to perform a mirrored backup of my office mainframe every night at midnight. I held the drive up like a weapon. Everything is on here. The wire transfers to offshore gambling sites, the payments to the shell companies he set up to siphon off our construction loans, the emails to you, Mr. Sterling, where he promised to deliver my client list if you helped him push me out. Tyson let out a roar. It was a primal, desperate sound. He lunged at me. He moved faster than I expected, his hands reaching for the hard drive, his face twisted into a mask of violence. "Give it to me!" he screamed. The crowd shrieked. Courtney covered her face. But Tyson never reached me. A blur of motion intercepted him. One of Valmont's security guards moved with terrifying speed. He did not punch Tyson. He simply stepped into his path, grabbed Tyson's outstretched arm, and used his own momentum against him. There was a sickening thud as Tyson hit the marble floor face first. The guard pinned his arm behind his back and pressed a knee into his spine. Tyson gasped for air, writhing in pain, pinned to the very floor he claimed to have designed. "Stay down," the guard said calmly. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down at my ex-husband, the man who had promised to love and cherish me, now reduced to a violent criminal on the floor of his own engagement party. "It is over, Tyson," I said coldly. "The police are already on their way with a warrant for the seizure of this drive. You are not going to the altar. You are going to federal prison for corporate fraud and grand larceny." The room was dead silent. The only sound was Tyson's ragged breathing and the soft hum of the server room behind me. The guests looked at me with awe and fear. I had walked in as an uninvited guest, and I had dismantled their entire world in less than 20 minutes. Mr. Sterling sank onto the sofa, holding his head in his hands. He looked old and defeated. His empire was built on a partnership with a fraud, and now the foundation was cracking. But then a slow, dry clap broke the silence. I turned. Hunter was still standing there. He was not looking at Tyson. He was not looking at the blueprints. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through a document. He looked calm, too calm. He put his phone in his pocket and looked up at me. His eyes were cold and calculating. "Very impressive," Jada Hunter said. "You proved he is a fraud. You proved he stole the money. You proved you designed the house. I will give you that. You have won the moral victory. He walked over to the table and picked up his glass of scotch, taking a slow sip. But we are not in a moral court. We are in the real world. And in the real world, possession is 9/10 of the law. He gestured to the floor, to the walls, to the land outside. You proved you designed the structure, Jada, but you forgot one thing. The house is not an airplane. It does not float. It sits on land. He smiled, a shark sensing blood in the water. When the bank foreclosed on your company, they seized the assets. That included the land this house sits on. My father-in-law, Mr. Sterling, purchased the deed to the land from the bank at the auction. He owns the dirt, Jada. Hunter took a step toward me, his confidence returning. Under Georgia state law, any permanent structure affixed to the land belongs to the owner of the land. It does not matter who drew the blueprints. It does not matter who paid for the bricks. If it is on our dirt, it is our house. He pointed at the door. So call the police. Send Tyson to jail. I do not care. He is a liability anyway. But you are still trespassing. This is Mr. Sterling's property, and you have exactly 5 minutes to get off his land before I have you arrested for criminal trespass. I stood there, the hard drive in my hand. Hunter was right. It was a technicality, but it was a technicality that could crush me. I had won the battle of truth, but I was about to lose the war of ownership. Mr. Sterling looked up, hope returning to his eyes. Is that true, Hunter? It is ironclad, Hunter said. We own the land. We own the house. She has nothing. The crowd murmured. The tide was turning again. They looked at me, waiting to see if I would crumble. I looked at Valmont. He was standing by the door, his face unreadable. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I looked back at Hunter. I looked at the smug satisfaction on his face. He thought he had found the ultimate loophole. He thought he had me checkmated. But he did not know who I had flown to Monaco to meet. He did not know that while I was revealing the ghost room, Valmont had been on the phone with the Swiss bankers who held the mortgage on Mr. Sterling's entire real estate portfolio. I smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had already placed the dynamite and was just waiting to light the fuse. You are right, Hunter, I said softly. You own the land. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the satellite phone Valmont had given me. But you forgot to check who owns the bank that loaned you the money to buy the land. I pressed the call button. Mr. Valmont, I said, never taking my eyes off Hunter. Execute the clause. Call the note. Now. The sound of Hunter's voice cut through the room like a jagged knife. He had watched Tyson fall. He had watched the blueprints prove my genius, and he had barely blinked. While everyone else was reeling from the revelation of the ghost room, Hunter had been doing what he did best. He had been looking for the loophole. He had been searching for the one technicality that could render truth irrelevant. And by the smug, predatory look on his face, he had found it. He stepped over Tyson's sobbing form as if my ex-husband was nothing more than a piece of discarded furniture. Hunter straightened his silk tie and looked at me with a pitying smile that made my blood boil. You really are a talented architect, Jada, Hunter said, his voice calm and terrifyingly reasonable. I will concede that point. You drew the plans, you poured the concrete, you hid the server room. Legally, you have proven that you are the creator of this structure. He paused, letting the silence stretch out, letting the hope in the room rise, just so he could crush it. But unfortunately for you, we are not standing in a court of intellectual property. We are standing on earth. We are standing on soil. And in the state of Georgia, real estate law is very specific about the relationship between the land and the improvements upon it. Hunter walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and tapped his knuckles against the glass. When the bank foreclosed on your construction company, they seized everything: your trucks, your tools, and most importantly, the deed to this plot of land. And when my father-in-law, Mr. Sterling, purchased that deed at the auction, he became the absolute owner of the dirt beneath our feet. Hunter turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with malice. The law of fixtures is clear, Jada. Anything permanently attached to the land belongs to the landowner. It does not matter if you built it with your own hands. It does not matter if you signed every beam. If it is bolted to Mr. Sterling's ground, it is Mr. Sterling's house. You built a masterpiece, yes, but you built it in a cage that we own. The guests whispered. I could see the shift in their eyes. They were relieved. They wanted Hunter to be right. They wanted the status quo to be restored so they could go back to drinking their champagne without feeling guilty about destroying a woman's life. So Hunter continued, checking his watch. You are still just a trespasser. You are an intruder disturbing the peace of a private residence. I am going to give you exactly 5 minutes to walk out that front door before I have the sheriff arrest you. And this time, Jada, you will not get out on bail because I will make sure the charges include corporate espionage and harassment. Mr. Sterling, who had been slumped on the sofa looking defeated, suddenly sat up straighter. He looked at Hunter, then at me. The color returned to his cheeks. The arrogance that had defined his entire career came rushing back. That is right, Sterling barked, standing up. This is my property. I have the deed in my safe at home. You have nothing, Jada. You are nothing. Get out of my house before I have you thrown out. He waved his hand at me dismissively, the gesture of a king banishing a peasant. I stood there, clutching the hard drive. I felt the weight of Valmont's gaze on my back. I looked at Hunter, then at Sterling. They thought they had won. They thought money and property rights trumped everything. They thought they were untouchable because they owned the dirt. I let a small, sad smile touch my lips. It was the smile of someone watching a man rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic. You are right, Hunter, I said softly. You own the land, and usually that would be enough. I took a step closer to Sterling. But you forgot the first rule of real estate, Mr. Sterling. You never build an empire on debt that you cannot service. Sterling frowned. What are you talking about? My finances are impeccable. Are they? I asked. Because according to the files I just recovered from the server, you leveraged the Sterling Group to the hilt to buy out my company and acquire this land. You took out a $50 million bridge loan from a private equity division of the Zurich Canton Bank, a loan with very specific covenants regarding liquidity and reputation. Sterling laughed, but it sounded forced. So what, I have never missed a payment. The room suddenly went quiet as a ringtone pierced the air. It was not a standard ringtone. It was the shrill, demanding trill of a satellite secure line. And it was coming from Mr. Sterling's jacket pocket. He froze. He knew that ringtone. Only 3 people in the world had that number, and none of them called for social reasons. Answer it, Franklin, I said. I think you are going to want to hear this. Sterling glared at me, his hand trembling as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the phone. The screen flashed a Swiss country code. He hesitated, then pressed answer. Sterling here. He barked into the phone, trying to sound authoritative. This is a bad time. I am in the middle of... He stopped. His eyes went wide. The color that had just returned to his face drained away instantly, leaving him looking like a corpse. What do you mean, sold? He whispered. That is impossible. The term is 5 years. You cannot just... He listened for another moment, and then his knees gave out. He collapsed back onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his fingers onto the cushion. What is it? Franklin Hunter asked, rushing to his side. What happened? Sterling looked up, his eyes unfocused, staring at something only he could see. The bank, he stammered. They invoked the morality clause. They said the public exposure of fraud at the company. The video of Tyson. It puts the collateral at risk. They declared the loan in default. So we pay the penalty, Hunter said quickly. We can handle a penalty. No, Sterling whispered, a tear leaking out of his eye. They sold the debt. They sold the entire note to a private distressed asset fund 10 minutes ago. The new creditor has demanded immediate repayment of the full $50 million. If we do not pay by midnight, they take everything. The company, the land, this house. Hunter whipped his head around, looking at the guests, looking for a solution. Who bought it? We will negotiate. We will sue. Who has that kind of capital to move that fast? Sterling shook his head. I do not know. They said it was a blind trust. I cleared my throat. The sound was soft, but in the silent room it sounded like a gavel striking a podium. Actually, I said, it is not a blind trust. I turned to Valmont. He stepped forward out of the shadows. In his hands he held a leather-bound document folder identical to the one I carried, but stamped with the gold crest of the Dubois family. He walked over to me and handed me the folder with a small bow. "It is done," Madame Valmont said. "The wire transfer cleared 4 minutes ago. The Zurich bank was very happy to offload such a toxic asset." I took the folder. I felt the power of it vibrating through my fingertips. This was not just paper. This was a guillotine. I walked over to the coffee table where Hunter had thrown his legal threats. I dropped the folder on top of them. "Open it, Hunter," I said. "You like reading contracts. Read the header." Hunter snatched the folder. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the page. He scanned the document. His eyes bulged. He looked at me, then back at the paper, then at me again with pure horror. "The Dubois Jada Fund," he read, his voice barely a whisper. "That is me," I said. I looked at Sterling. "I am not a trespasser, Franklin. I am your bank, I am your creditor, and I am the owner of the $50 million noose around your neck." Sterling stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But you are broke. You were sleeping in a truck." I agreed, until I found out what my blood was worth. "While you were planning this party, I was in a clinic saving the life of a billionaire who happens to be my grandfather, and he gave me a blank check." I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear on him. I could have bought an island, I could have bought a jet, but I decided to buy something much more satisfying. I bought you. I stood up straight and addressed the room. "Hunter said that the owner of the land owns the house. He is right. And as the sole holder of the defaulted note, I am exercising my right to accelerate the debt, since Mr. Sterling clearly does not have $50 million in cash on him right now. I am initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder. "This is a notice of seizure. It authorizes the creditor to take immediate possession of the collateral to secure the asset." I looked at Hunter. "You gave me 5 minutes to leave. I am generous. I will give you 0 minutes." I turned to the security guards Valmont had brought. "Gentlemen," I said, "please escort these trespassers off my property. All of them." Sterling let out a strangled cry. "You cannot do this. I built this empire. You built it on my back," I shouted, finally letting my anger loose. "You stole my company. You stole my designs. You let your daughter humiliate me. You thought because I was a woman, because I was black, because I didn't come from old money, that I would just roll over and die." I pointed at the door. "Get out. Get out of my house before I have you arrested for embezzlement. Because unlike you, Hunter, I actually have the evidence to make the charges stick." Valmont snapped his fingers. 6 more security agents appeared from the hallway. They moved toward the Sterling family. Hunter tried to stand his ground. "This is illegal. We have rights. We have tenancy laws." I laughed. It was a sound of pure victory. "Read the contract. Hunter Clause 7A. Commercial property seizure. There are no tenancy rights for a defaulted commercial loan, and since you listed this house as a corporate retreat to get a tax break, it is commercial property." Hunter's jaw dropped. He had been hoisted by his own petard. His own tax evasion scheme was the final nail in his coffin. The guards grabbed Sterling by the arms. He was shouting, kicking, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, but they dragged him toward the door. Tyson was already being hauled up from the floor, his nose bleeding, his tuxedo ruined. And Courtney. She was standing alone in the middle of the room, holding her empty wineglass, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. She realized suddenly that she was not the princess in the castle anymore. She was just a girl standing in the middle of a war zone she had helped start. I walked over to her. I took the glass from her hand and set it on the table. "You should go, Courtney," I said quietly. "And take your dress. It is the only thing you own that is leaving this house tonight." The house lights snapped on with a blinding, clinical brightness. It was not the soft, romantic ambient lighting of a party anymore. It was the harsh, exposing glare of an interrogation room. I signaled to the tech booth I had hijacked earlier to cut the music. The jazz band stopped playing mid-note, the saxophone player lowering his instrument in confusion. The silence that rushed into the room was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of the server room cooling fans and the ragged breathing of the family I had just dismantled. I looked at my watch. It was a simple utilitarian watch, not the diamond-encrusted timepiece Tyson wore, but it told the only time that mattered. "You have 30 minutes, I announced, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without the need for a microphone. I turned to the hundreds of guests who were standing around holding half-empty glasses of champagne. "The party is over. This property has been seized by the creditor. Anyone remaining on the premises after 30 minutes will be considered complicit in criminal trespassing. I suggest you retrieve your coats and your vehicles immediately. The gates are open." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. They were paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the command. They looked at Mr. Sterling, waiting for him to countermand the order, waiting for him to laugh and say it was all a misunderstanding. But Franklin Sterling was slumped on the sofa, gray-faced and trembling. He did not look like a titan of industry. He looked like an old man who had just realized his checkbook was empty. Then the chaos started. It began with Courtney. She had been standing by the table, frozen in shock, but the sound of my voice snapped something inside her. The entitlement that had been fed to her with a silver spoon her entire life suddenly curdled into a violent, irrational rage. She could not process a world where she lost. She could not accept a reality where the woman she had looked down on was now holding the keys to her castle. "You witch!" Courtney screamed. It was a primal, ugly shriek that tore through the room. She abandoned all pretense of grace. She hiked up her silver gown and charged at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hate, her manicured claws reaching for my face. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to erase the smirk she thought she saw on my lips. I did not move. I did not flinch. I had spent years on construction sites, dodging swinging beams and navigating treacherous scaffolding. A spoiled heiress in 6-inch heels was not a physical threat to me. I simply watched her come. But Courtney forgot where she was running. In her blind fury, she forgot about the puddle of red wine she had deliberately spilled on the floor 20 minutes earlier to humiliate me. The same wine I had warned her would stain the marble. Her heel hit the slick, crimson liquid. It happened in slow motion. Her eyes went wide as her feet flew out from under her. She flailed her arms trying to catch her balance, but there was nothing to grab except the table next to her. The table that held the 6-foot-tall champagne tower. She crashed into it with the force of a wrecking ball. The sound was deafening. Hundreds of crystal glasses shattered simultaneously. Gallons of expensive champagne cascaded down, mixing with the red wine on the floor. Courtney landed hard in the middle of the debris, the shards of glass sparkling around her like jagged diamonds. She lay there sprawled in the wreckage of her own party, her silver dress soaked in sticky golden alcohol. A stunned silence held the room for 1 second, and then the flashbulb started. I looked around. The guests, the so-called friends of the Sterling family, the people who had been drinking their liquor and eating their caviar all night, were not rushing to help her. They were backing away, and they were pulling out their phones. I saw a prominent Atlanta socialite holding her iPhone high, live-streaming the scene. I saw a real estate developer recording Courtney's humiliation, probably to text to his business partners. The tide had turned completely. The Sterlings were no longer the power players to be sucked up to. They were now a viral train wreck, and everyone wanted a front-row seat to the disaster. Courtney sat up gasping, wiping champagne from her eyes. She looked at the guests recording her. "Stop it!" she wailed, trying to cover her face. "Stop filming! Help me!" Nobody moved. They were too busy tagging their posts with hashtags like Sterling Scandal and Karma. Suddenly, a groan from the sofa drew my attention. Franklin Sterling clutched his chest. He gasped loudly, his other hand gripping the armrest of the couch until his knuckles turned white. He slumped sideways, his breathing coming in ragged theatrical gasps. My heart, he wheezed, looking up at the crowd with pleading eyes. "Call 911. I am having a heart attack." Hunter, who had been frantically texting on his phone, dropped to his knees beside his father-in-law. "Dad, stay with us. Someone call an ambulance. He is dying. Look what you did. Jada, you are killing him." The crowd gasped again. Sympathy began to flicker back toward the old man. A few people stepped forward looking concerned. It was a classic Sterling move. When you cannot win with power, you win with pity. I walked over to the sofa. My heels crunched on the broken glass, the sound sharp and gritty. I stood over Franklin Sterling. I looked down at him, my expression completely void of emotion. I watched his eyes dart up to me, checking to see if his performance was working. "Cut the act, Franklin," I said, my voice cold as ice. Hunter looked up at me furious. "Are you a monster? He is having a cardiac event." "No, he is having a panic attack because he is broke," I said. "And even if he were having a heart attack, I find it hard to muster any sympathy." I leaned down, bringing my face close to Sterling's. "Do you remember Marcus Henderson?" "Franklin?" Sterling's eyes flickered. He stopped gasping for a split second. "He was a foreman at my company." I continued speaking loud enough for the camera phones to pick up every word. "He worked for me for 10 years. When you took over my business and stripped the assets, you canceled our health insurance policy retroactively to save 3% on the quarterly budget. 2 weeks later, Marcus fell from a scaffolding on one of your sites because your new safety manager cut corners." I paused, letting the memory fuel my words. "He shattered his pelvis. He needed emergency surgery. And do you remember what you said when his wife called you begging for the company to cover the medical bills?" Sterling stopped clutching his chest. He stared at me, fear replacing the fake pain. "You told her that accidents happen to careless people and that the company had no liability. You let a man who built your empire lose his home to medical debt while you bought this lake house." I straightened up, towering over him. "So do not lie there and pretend to be the victim. You have the best healthcare money can buy. Marcus had nothing. If you are dying, Franklin, do it quietly. You are ruining the carpet." Sterling's face went purple, not from a heart attack, but from pure, unadulterated rage. He sat up, the act forgotten, realizing that his manipulation had failed. Just then, the wail of sirens cut through the night air. Blue and red lights flashed against the glass walls of the living room, pulsing in time with the chaos. Hunter jumped up, a smug grin returning to his face. Finally, Hunter said, "The police. I told you, Jada. I texted the sheriff 10 minutes ago. You are going to jail for assault, trespassing, and inducing a medical crisis." He ran to the front door as heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Sheriff Miller Hunter shouted as the uniformed officer walked through the door. "Thank God you are here. Arrest this woman immediately. She has hijacked our home, she assaulted my wife, and she is threatening my father-in-law." Sheriff Miller was a big man with a stone face. He walked into the room, his hand resting on his belt. He looked at the shattered champagne tower. He looked at Courtney sobbing on the floor. He looked at Tyson still pinned by my security guard. And finally he looked at me. He walked past Hunter without saying a word. Sheriff Hunter yelled, following him, "Did you hear me? I am pressing charges. Get her out of here." Sheriff Miller stopped in front of me. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Are you Miss Jada Vance?" he asked. "I am," I replied calmly. Hunter laughed. "See, handcuffs are coming out. Goodbye, Jada." The sheriff pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was not an arrest warrant. It was a thick document with a raised court seal. "Ms. Vance," the sheriff said, his voice professional and flat. "We received the digital filing from the creditor's attorney regarding the emergency foreclosure and the accelerated debt clause on the Sterling estate. I have reviewed the writ of possession." He turned to Hunter and Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Brooks," the sheriff said, "this document confirms that title to this property has been transferred to the Dubois Jada Fund effective immediately. You are no longer the owners of record. What? Hunter screamed. That is impossible. We need a hearing. We need 30 days' notice. Not for a commercial default on a high-risk bridge loan, the sheriff said, cutting him off. I checked the statutes myself. The creditor has the right to secure the asset to prevent further damage. He pointed at the broken glass and the spilled wine. And seeing the state of the property, I would say their concerns about damage were justified. The sheriff turned back to Sterling. Sir, I am going to have to ask you to vacate the premises. Ms. Vance has been gracious enough to give you 30 minutes. My deputies will supervise the exit to ensure nothing else is broken. Sterling stood up, shaking. You are kicking me out of my own house. I have lived in this county for 40 years. I play golf with the mayor, and Ms. Vance owns the banknote, the sheriff said, unmoved. Unless you have $50 million in a briefcase right now, you are trespassing. He looked at his watch. You have 28 minutes left. I suggest you start packing. And folks, he said, addressing the guests, unless you want your license plates run for outstanding warrants, I suggest you clear the driveway. The room erupted into motion. It was a stampede. The guests, realizing the show was over and the police were involved, scrambled for the exits. They stepped over the glass, ignored Courtney's cries, and pushed past the Sterlings to get to their cars. I stood in the center of the room, watching the rats flee the sinking ship. Hunter was arguing impotently with a deputy. Tyson was being dragged to his feet by the guards. Courtney was trying to scrape champagne off her dress. I looked at Valmont. He gave me a small, respectful nod. The house was mine. But I wasn't done yet. I walked over to the sound system control panel on the wall. I pressed a button, the lights dimmed slightly, and music began to play again. But it wasn't jazz. It was a song I had chosen specifically for this moment. Hit the road. Jack, I whispered along with the lyrics. And don't you come back no more. The last taillights of the fleeing guests faded down the driveway, leaving the Glass Lake house in a state of eerie desolation. The floor was sticky with drying champagne and red wine. The air smelled of expensive perfume mixed with the metallic tang of fear. What had been a party of 300 people was now reduced to just us. Me standing in my white suit, Valmont standing guard like a sentinel, and the Sterling family huddled together in the wreckage of their arrogance. Tyson was wiping blood from his nose with a cocktail napkin, trying to make himself small. Courtney was shivering on the sofa, her silver dress ruined, staring at the floor as if hoping a hole would open up and swallow her. But Hunter was not done. Even with the police gone and the eviction notice served, Hunter was still trying to find an angle. He was a creature of transaction, and he believed that every situation, no matter how catastrophic, had a price tag. He smoothed his tie, stepping over a pile of broken glass to approach me. His face was pale, but his eyes were calculating. Look, Jada, let us be reasonable, he said, his voice pitching into a tone of forced camaraderie. You have made your point. You have humiliated us. You have seized the title. Congratulations. But let us look at the economics here. He gestured to the sprawling house. You are a builder, Jada, not a landlord. You do not want to manage a $50 million estate. The property taxes alone will bleed your fund dry, and dragging this through probate court in Monaco will take years. The legal fees will eat up your liquidity. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Why destroy us when you can use us? Mr. Sterling still has connections in zoning that you do not. I have legal avenues to expedite permits that would take you months. Why do we not restructure the deal? We turn this into a joint venture. We split the equity 50-50. You get your name on the deed, we stay in the house, and we all make money. It is a win-win. I stared at him. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. He was standing in the ruins of his own making, asking the executioner to become a business partner. Valmont stepped forward. He did not move aggressively, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. Mr. Hunter Valmont, said, his voice smooth and cold as a glacier. You are laboring under a significant delusion. You believe this is a business transaction. You believe Ms. Vance is motivated by profit. Valmont placed the recorder on the marble coffee table. This is not about money. This is not about real estate. This is about blood. He pressed the play button. A voice filled the room. It was not a young voice. It was raspy, weak, straining against the weight of age and pain, but it carried an undeniable authority. It was the voice of Alexandre Dubois speaking from his hospital bed in Monaco. My name is Alexandre Dubois. The recording began the sound of a heart monitor beeping faintly in the background. If you are hearing this, it means my granddaughter has found her way home. Granddaughter Tyson whispered, looking up from his bloody napkin. Valmont held up a hand for silence. The voice continued. 40 years ago, my daughter Eleanor was taken from me. She was 18 years old. She was kidnapped from our estate in Nice during the summer gala. We paid the ransom. We paid millions. But they never returned her. They told us she was dead. They told us her body was lost at sea. I felt my knees go weak. Eleanor. That was my mother's name. But my mother was not a French heiress. My mother was a maid. She scrubbed floors. She took the bus to work. She died of a stroke at 55 because she could not afford the medication she needed. For 4 decades I mourned her. The recording continued. I thought my bloodline ended with me. But when the doctors analyzed the blood of the donor, Ms. Jada Vance, they found a marker. A genetic sequence that only exists in the Dubois lineage. It is not just the Rh null blood type, it is the specific protein chain carried only by my daughter. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. The room was spinning. Jada is not just a match, the old man's voice rasped. She is my direct descendant. She is Eleanor's daughter, and that means she is the sole heir to the Dubois estate. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Valmont. My mother, I whispered. My mother was a Dubois. Valmont nodded solemnly. She did not know Jada. The kidnappers brought her to America. They changed her name. They stripped her of her memory, probably through trauma or drugs, and dumped her in the foster system when the heat got too high. She grew up thinking she was an orphan named Eleanor Vance. She lived a hard life, never knowing she was the princess of a dynasty. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I thought about my mother's hands, rough and cracked from harsh cleaning chemicals. I thought about how she used to look at magazines featuring European castles and sigh, saying it looked like a fairy tale. It was not a fairy tale. It was her home. Hunter let out a nervous laugh. Okay, so she is rich. Great. That just means she has even more reason to cut a deal. We can be quiet, Valmont snapped. He turned his gaze to Franklin Sterling. The old man was sitting on the sofa looking like he had turned to stone. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the recorder, his eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with bankruptcy. Valmont walked over to Sterling. He moved like a predator closing in on wounded prey. There is one loose end, Mr. Sterling, Valmont said softly. When we dug into Eleanor Vance's employment history, we found something very interesting. She worked for you. Sterling flinched. She was a maid, he croaked. She cleaned my offices in the 80s. I gave her a job when nobody else would. Valmont pulled a yellowed piece of paper from his folder. We found this in your private archives, Franklin. It is a police bulletin from Interpol dated 1984. It lists the physical description of the missing Dubois heiress, a specific birthmark on her shoulder, a specific scar on her left palm. Valmont held the paper up. My mother had that scar, I whispered. She cut her hand on a fence when she was a child. She told me that story 1,000 times. You knew, Valmont said, his voice rising to a roar that shook the glass walls. You knew who she was, Franklin. You saw the bulletin. You recognized the girl cleaning your floors. You knew there was a reward of $5 million for information leading to her return. Sterling was shaking his head violently, sweat pouring down his face. No, I did not know. It is a coincidence. You did know Valmont accused Relentless, but you did not turn her in. You did not claim the reward. Why? Because you were running a construction scam in the 80s, were you not? You were laundering money for the cartels. If you went to the police, if you brought international attention to your business, Interpol would have looked at your books. You would have gone to prison. Valmont leaned down into Sterling's face. So you made a choice. To protect your dirty money, you decided to keep a kidnapped girl hidden. You kept her poor. You kept her uneducated. You kept her scrubbing your toilets so she would never have the resources to find out who she really was. You stole her life to save your own skin. I felt a scream building in my chest that was so loud I thought it would shatter my ribs. I looked at Franklin Sterling. I did not see the powerful businessman anymore. I saw the monster who had enslaved my mother who worked 16-hour days, my mother who apologized for not being able to buy me new school clothes, my mother who died believing she was nobody. She was right there. I said, my voice trembling with a rage that felt ancient. All those years. I used to come to your office after school and wait for her. You saw me. You patted me on the head. You gave me candy. I stepped closer to him. You looked into my eyes knowing I was the granddaughter of a billionaire, and you watched my mother beg you for a 25-cent raise. Sterling shrank back into the cushions. I gave her a job, Jada. I kept her off the streets. You kept her in a cage, I screamed. You knew she had a father searching for her. You let an old man grieve for 40 years. You let my mother die of overwork when she should have been ruling an empire. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not just business. Tyson stealing my company was a playground insult compared to this. This was a crime against my blood. This was a crime against my soul. Tyson and Courtney looked at their father in horror. Even they, with their shallow morals, could not comprehend the magnitude of this evil. To hide a human being. To steal a destiny. I wiped the tears from my face. My hand was steady now. The trembling was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that felt like steel. Valmont, I said, not taking my eyes off Sterling. Yes, madame. The deal is off. There is no negotiation. There is no settlement. I looked at Hunter. You wanted to split the equity. You wanted to be partners. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up a heavy iron poker. I am not going to sue you, Hunter. I am not going to bankrupt you, Franklin. That is too easy. That is too civilized. I turned to Valmont. Get the jet ready. We are going to Monaco. But before we go, I want you to initiate Option 0 on the Sterling portfolio. Hunter gasped. Option 0. That is the nuclear option. That scorches the earth. You will lose money too. You will destroy the asset value. I do not care about the asset value, I shouted, slamming the poker onto the marble table, cracking the stone. I looked at Sterling, who was weeping now, curled into a ball. You took my mother's life. You took her name. You took her time. So now I am going to take your legacy. I am not just taking this house. I am going to dismantle every building you ever built. I am going to audit every tax return you ever filed. I am going to dig up every skeleton in every closet you own until the name Sterling is synonymous with ruin. I threw the poker down. My mother cleaned your floors, Franklin. Now you are going to spend the rest of your life buried under them. I turned to Tyson and Courtney. And you two. You thought you were marrying into a dynasty. You just married into a crime scene. I walked toward the door, my white suit glowing in the harsh light. Valmont, let's go. My grandfather is waiting. And we have a lot of work to do. As I walked out into the cool night air, I heard the sound of Courtney screaming at her father, the sound of a family tearing itself apart from the inside. But I did not look back. I looked up at the moon. I am coming home, Mom, I whispered, and I am bringing the fire with me. The silence in the room was replaced by the sound of a dynasty crumbling. It was not a loud explosion, but a series of pathetic whimpering noises. I walked over to the massive mahogany desk that had belonged to Franklin Sterling for 40 years. It was the throne from which he had ruled his empire, the desk where he had signed the orders to ruin my company, and the desk where he had kept the secret of my mother's identity hidden for decades. I sat down in the high-backed leather chair. It creaked under my weight, a sound of submission. I rested my hands on the cool wood and looked down at the people who had tried to destroy me. Tyson was the first to break. He looked at Mr. Sterling, who was weeping in the corner. Then he looked at me. He realized that his protector was gone. He realized that the money was gone. And like a rat sensing the ship was going down, he decided to eat his own kind to survive. He scrambled across the floor on his hands and knees. The velvet of his expensive tuxedo pants tore on the broken glass, but he did not care. He crawled until he was at the foot of the desk, right in front of my white heels. He reached out to grab my ankle, but Valmont stepped on his hand, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to remind him of his place. Jada. Please. Tyson sobbed, snot running down his face, mixing with the blood from his nose. You have to understand. It was not me. I never wanted to hurt you. I still love you, Jada. You know I do. I looked down at him with clinical detachment. You loved me so much, you stole my blueprints and gave them to another woman. That was her idea. Tyson screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Courtney. He spun around on his knees, his eyes wide and frantic. It was all her. She was jealous of you, Jada. She knew how talented you were. She told me that if I did not bring her your designs, she would have her father destroy your reputation anyway. She made me do it, Jada. She bewitched me. She promised me money and status, and I was weak. But I never stopped thinking about you. He looked back at me, his eyes pleading. I am a victim too, Jada. Hunter and Franklin, they forced me to sign those papers. They threatened me. I was a hostage in this house. Please, baby, you have the money now. You have the power. We can rebuild together. I can run the construction side for you. I know the crew. I know the vendors. Take me back. Please, just take me back. The sound of his betrayal hung in the air, toxic and heavy. But before I could answer, a shriek tore through the room. You lying piece of trash. Courtney had been standing by the window, shaking in shock, but hearing her fiancé blame her for everything snapped the last thread of her sanity. She did not look like a debutante anymore. She looked feral. She launched herself across the room, her silver heels skidding on the marble. She crashed into Tyson, knocking him sideways. They rolled onto the floor in a tangle of limbs and ruined formal wear. It was grotesque. The couple that had posed for magazine covers, the couple that was supposed to be the royalty of Atlanta society, was now clawing at each other's faces like stray dogs fighting over a bone. I gave you everything, Courtney screamed, digging her nails into Tyson's cheek. My father bought you this house. I bought you that watch. You were a broke loser when I found you, and you are a broke loser now. Get off me, you psycho, Tyson yelled, trying to push her away. You ruined my life. I should have stayed with Jada. He slapped her. The sound echoed through the room. Courtney gasped, then grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray from the floor and swung it. It connected with Tyson's shoulder with a sickening thud. I sat in the leather chair and watched. I did not intervene. I did not look away. This was the true face of their love. It was transactional. It was shallow. And the moment the currency of power was removed, it dissolved into violence. It was a dog-eat-dog world, and I was the one holding the leash. Valmont stood beside me, his face impassive. Should I separate them, Madame? He asked quietly. I shook my head. No. Let them finish. It is the most honest interaction they have ever had. While the happy couple was tearing each other apart on the rug, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Hunter was backing away slowly. He was moving toward the service entrance that led to the kitchen and the back gardens. He was trying to make himself invisible. He had stopped arguing legal precedents. He had stopped threatening me. He was in survival mode. He reached the door handle. He looked back one last time, his eyes meeting mine. He saw that I was watching him. He froze for a second, then turned the handle, desperate to slip into the night and disappear before the consequences caught up with him. But the door did not open. Instead, it was pushed open from the outside. Hunter stumbled back as two men in navy blue windbreakers stepped into the room. On the back of their jackets in bright yellow letters were three letters that made every white-collar criminal's blood run cold. FBI. Going somewhere? Counselor Valmont called out. Hunter spun around, his face draining of all color. I did not call the local police for you, Hunter, I said, standing up from the desk. The sheriff is for evictions, but for money laundering, for wire fraud across state lines, for structuring illegal transactions to hide assets from federal regulators, that requires a different level of law enforcement. Hunter held up his hands. Wait, I can explain. I was acting on client instructions. I have attorney-client privilege. Not when you are an active participant in the crime, one of the agents said, stepping forward. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Hunter Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, racketeering, and falsifying federal bankruptcy documents. We also have a warrant for the seizure of your electronic devices. The agent spun Hunter around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was louder than the screams coming from Tyson and Courtney. Jada Hunter yelled as they dragged him out. You cannot do this. I know judges. I know senators. This is a mistake. It is not a mistake, Hunter, I said calmly. It is justice. And unlike the lawsuits you filed against me, this is one case you cannot settle out of court. I looked down at Tyson and Courtney. They had stopped fighting when the FBI agents entered. They were lying on the floor, panting, bleeding, and staring at Hunter being hauled away. They realized finally that there was no exit. There was no loophole. The walls had fallen and the sky was falling with them. I walked over to them. I stood over them like a colossus. Get up, I said. Get out of my house. I signaled to Valmont's security team. They moved in, grabbing Tyson and Courtney by the arms and dragging them toward the front door. I followed them. I wanted to see this to the end. I wanted to see them cross the threshold from my world back into the nothingness they deserved. We walked out onto the front porch. The night air was cool and crisp. The driveway was bathed in the strobe light effect of red and blue emergency lights. The sheriff's deputies were there to supervise the eviction, but now there were unmarked federal vehicles blocking the gate. I walked to the edge of the stone balcony that overlooked the driveway. I leaned against the railing, the white marble cold under my hands. From up here, I looked like the lady of the manor. Down there on the gravel, they looked like what they were, trespassers. The security guards shoved Tyson toward a waiting police cruiser. The local police had run his plates as promised, and the warrant for his arrest regarding the stolen hard drive had already hit the system. Tyson saw me on the balcony. He stopped fighting the officers. He looked up, his face swollen, his tuxedo torn, tears streaming down his face. Jada, he screamed, his voice raw. Jada, please, do not let them take me. I am sorry, I love you. Remember the beginning. Remember when we started the company in your garage? We were a team. We can be a team again. I looked down at him. I remembered the garage. I remembered eating ramen noodles while we saved for our first truck. I remembered trusting him with my dreams. And I remembered him laughing while he kicked me out of my own life. I leaned over the railing. I remember everything, Tyson, I called down. I remember you telling me I was worthless. I remember you telling me I belonged in a cage. Tyson sobbed. I did not mean it. I was scared. Save me, Jada. You have billions now. You can buy the best lawyers. You can get me out. I smiled. It was a terrifying smile. You are right, Tyson. I can buy anything. That is why I made a phone call while you were fighting on the floor. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I bought the debt on the private correctional facility in South Georgia, the one where they are taking you tonight. Tyson's eyes went wide. No. I own the prison, Tyson, I said, my voice ringing out like a bell. I am the majority shareholder of the corporation that runs the facility, and I have already sent a memo to the warden. I have requested that you be assigned to the manual labor detail. You like building things, right? You like construction. Well, you are going to spend the next 10 years digging ditches and paving roads for 50 cents an hour. No, Jada. No, Tyson screamed as the officers shoved him into the back of the cruiser. He slammed his face against the window, mouthing my name, but I turned away. He was already a ghost to me. I looked at Courtney. She was standing by the fountain, shivering. The police were not arresting her yet. Her crimes were moral, not federal, at least for now. But she was in a worse position. She had no car. The keys had been seized. She had no phone. I had confiscated it as evidence. And she had no money. She looked up at me. Her silver dress was stained red with wine and sticky with champagne. Her hair was a rat's nest. Her makeup was running in black streaks down her face. "How am I supposed to get home?" she wailed. "It is 10 miles to town." "It is dark." I looked at her. I thought about my mother walking miles to work because she could not afford the bus fare. I thought about me sleeping in my truck in the freezing cold. "Start walking, Courtney," I said. "But I have heels on," she cried. "I cannot walk in these." "Then crawl," I said. I turned my back on her. I heard her sobbing, the click-clack of her broken heels on the pavement as she began the long, dark walk down the driveway she used to think she owned. Below me, another car door slammed. I watched as the FBI agents shoved Hunter into the back of a black SUV. He wasn't screaming. He was staring straight ahead, catatonic. He knew what was coming. The disbarment. The prison time. The absolute erasure of his social standing. He was a man who defined himself by his influence, and now he was just inmate number something or other. Valmont stepped up beside me on the balcony. He held out a glass of water. "It is done, madam," he said softly. "The house is secure. The prisoners are in custody. And the jet is fueled and waiting at the airfield." I took the water. I looked out over the dark lake. The reflection of the moon danced on the water undisturbed by the chaos that had just happened. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The anger that had fueled me for days was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space. I wasn't just Jada the construction worker anymore. I wasn't Jada the victim. I was Jada Dubois, and I had work to do. I took a sip of water. It tasted like victory. "Let's go to Monaco, Valmont," I said. "I want to meet my grandfather, and then I want to start drawing. I have a lot of new ideas for how to rebuild this world." I turned and walked back into the house, leaving the lights on, leaving the doors open, leaving the wreckage of the past behind me. I walked through the foyer, past the broken glass, past the spilled wine, and out toward the waiting Rolls-Royce. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. My future was waiting, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the pen. The morning mist hung low over the cemetery, clinging to the manicured grass like a soft white shroud. It was quiet here, a stark contrast to the noise and violence of the past week. I stood before a fresh grave, but it was not a new death. It was a rebirth. For 40 years, the woman buried here had laid under a modest cracking headstone that read simply, "Eleanor Vance, beloved mother." She had died thinking she was a nobody, a woman without a past, a woman whose hands were made only for scrubbing other people's floors. I watched as the stonemasons finished polishing the new monument I had commissioned. It was a massive slab of imported black obsidian, as dark and deep as the night sky. The gold lettering caught the first rays of the morning sun. It no longer said Vance. It read, "Eleanor Dubois, lost daughter of Monaco. Finally, home." I ran my hand over the cold stone. "I am sorry it took so long, Mom," I whispered. "But they know your name now. The whole world knows your name." Behind me, a black town car idled on the gravel path. Valmont stood by the door, respectful and silent. But I was not just here to grieve. I was here to work. I turned away from the grave and opened the folder Valmont handed me. Inside were the incorporation papers for the Jada and Eleanor Foundation. I did not keep the billions for myself. I did not need yachts or private islands to feel whole. I took the money from the Sterling acquisition and the funds from the Monaco Trust, and I weaponized them. We were opening 3 clinics in Atlanta dedicated to hematology research and rare blood types, ensuring that people like me would never have to sell their plasma for a sandwich again. But more importantly, we had established a legal defense fund. A massive aggressive war chest specifically designed to destroy slumlords, predatory lenders, and employers who exploited women of color. I looked at the paperwork. We had already filed our first 50 lawsuits this morning. The empire that Franklin Sterling built on the backs of the poor was being dismantled brick by the very people he had stepped on. "Take me to the hospital," I told Valmont. We did not go to the private medical center where the wealthy went to recover from their facelifts. We drove to the south side of the city, to the crumbling, underfunded county hospital that served the indigent population. The irony was not lost on me. This was the same hospital where my mother had died, because we could not afford a specialist. Now a new sign hung over the entrance. The Eleanor Dubois Medical Wing. I owned it. I walked through the corridors, my heels clicking on the linoleum. The nurses nodded to me with respect. They knew who signed their paychecks now. I stopped at room 304. It was a shared room smelling of antiseptic and despair. In the bed by the window lay Franklin Sterling. He was not the roaring lion who had thrown me out of his house a week ago. The stress of the foreclosure, the public humiliation, and the seizure of his assets had triggered a massive stroke. He was paralyzed on his right side. His face was slack, drooping heavily. He was hooked up to monitors that beeped in a steady, monotonous rhythm. When I walked in, his left eye, the only part of him that still worked perfectly, widened in terror. He tried to speak, but only a wet, guttural sound came from his throat. "Hello, Franklin," I said softly, standing at the foot of his bed. I did not shout. I did not gloat. I simply looked at him. "The doctors told me you have full cognitive function," I said. "You can hear everything. You can understand everything. You are trapped inside your own body just like you trapped my mother in a life of servitude." His eye darted frantically to the call button, but he could not reach it. "Do not worry," I said, stepping closer. "I am not here to hurt you. In fact, I am your guardian angel. When your insurance lapsed because your company accounts were frozen, the hospital was going to discharge you to a state facility. But I stepped in. I paid for your care." Franklin's eye filled with confusion. He could not understand why I would save him. "I paid for the best doctors, Franklin. I paid for the best life support systems. Because I want you to live." I leaned down, whispering directly into his ear. "I want you to live a very, very long time. I want you to lie in this bed, unable to move, unable to speak and watch the news. I want you to watch as I take your buildings and turn them into affordable housing. I want you to watch as I take your fortune and give it to the people you exploited. Death is too easy for you. You need to witness the world changing and know that you can do absolutely nothing to stop it." I patted his hand gently, a gesture that looked affectionate to anyone passing by but felt like ice to him. "Rest now, Franklin. You have a long life ahead of you, and I will be watching." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone with the sound of his own heartbeat and the knowledge that his hell was just beginning. 1 month later, the air tasted of salt and expensive champagne. I was standing on the deck of a super yacht docked in the harbor of Monte Carlo. The water was a shade of blue that looked photoshopped, shimmering under the Mediterranean sun. The hills of Monaco rose up behind us, dotted with villas and palaces. For the first time in my life, I was not fighting. I was not surviving. I was breathing. A sliding glass door opened, and a nurse wheeled an elderly man onto the deck. He was frail, his skin like parchment paper, but his eyes were sharp and blue, the same blue as mine. Alexander Dubois, my grandfather. He looked at me with a mixture of sadness and joy that broke my heart. He reached out a trembling hand. "Jada," he whispered. "You look just like her. You look just like Eleanor." I knelt beside his wheelchair and took his hand. It felt fragile like a dried leaf, but there was strength in his grip. The connection between us was electric. It was biological. It was the hum of this golden blood that flowed through both our veins, the genetic miracle that had saved his life and changed mine. "Thank you," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "You saved me." "You saved me first, grandfather," I replied. Behind him, another figure stepped out holding a silver tray with mimosas. It was Brenda, the nurse from the plasma clinic in Atlanta. The woman who had looked at me with pity was now wearing a crisp white uniform with the Dubois crest embroidered on the pocket. I had hired her 2 days after the incident. I quadrupled her salary and offered her a position as the head of private medical care for the Dubois family. She had packed her bags in an hour. "Here you go, Ms. Jada," Brenda said, beaming. She looked younger, rested. The stress of the underfunded clinic was gone from her face. "Thank you, Brenda." I smiled, taking the glass. I walked to the railing of the yacht and looked out at the horizon. I had everything. I had family. I had purpose. I had peace. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the table next to me. I picked it up. It was a text message from a number I did not have saved, but I knew who it was. "Jada, please. It is Courtney. I am sleeping on my friend's couch. They are threatening to kick me out. I have not eaten in 2 days. Can you please Venmo me $100 just for food? I promise I will pay you back. Please." I stared at the screen. $100. The exact amount I had tried to sell my body for at the plasma center. The exact amount she would have spent on a bottle of wine to throw at me. I looked at the text, and then I looked at the vast, deep ocean. I did not feel anger. I did not feel pity. I felt nothing. She was a ghost from a past life that no longer existed. I smiled a small private smile. I did not reply. I did not block the number. Instead, I walked to the edge of the boat, held the phone out over the water, and let go. I watched the device tumble end over end, flashing in the sunlight before it hit the water with a tiny, insignificant splash. It sank instantly, taking Courtney Tyson and the memories of my poverty down to the bottom of the sea. They say my blood is worth millions. They say it is liquid gold. And they are right. It saved my grandfather. It bought my freedom. But the most important life it saved was my own. I turned back to my grandfather and Brenda. "Brenda, tell the captain to pull up the anchor," I said, putting on my sunglasses. "Where to, Ms. Jada?" she asked. "Anywhere," I said. "Everywhere. The world is ours now." As the engines roared to life and the yacht began to cut through the waves, I realized something. You cannot let the world define your value. They will try to discount you. They will try to erase you. But if you know what runs in your veins, if you know who you truly are, you are priceless. I took a sip of my drink and watched the coastline fade away. My name is Jada Dubois, and my story is just beginning. This journey teaches us that our true value is innate, not circumstantial. Jada was discarded by those she trusted and stripped of her dignity, yet she carried a power within her veins that no one could take away. It is a powerful reminder that rock bottom is often the solid foundation upon which we build our greatest empires. The world may try to appraise you based on your bank account or your struggles, but only you hold the blueprint to your destiny. True revenge isn't just about justice. It is about surviving, thriving, and reclaiming the identity that was stolen from you. You are your own greatest asset. If Jada's victory inspired you to reclaim your own power, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch when everyone counted you out? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one.